do you think people feel guilty about forgiving themselves and how the study can help them?
Yeah, why that's so hard?
Yeah.
What makes it hard?
Yeah, I think it's hard to forgive yourself often, and I think Christians especially struggle with that uh, sometimes because they have this belief that if I take my sin to God and God forgives me, what am I doing by forgiving myself? Am I trumping God? And yet, really there is a psychological harm that I've done to myself, and there is a social harm that I've done to others. And even though God truly forgives my moral guilt and puts me in right relationship with God, I still have things that have to be worked out. It's just like David, when Nathan was able to say, God has forgiven you, he went on and said, but David, there's going to be consequences. You're going to have consequences in your family from now on because of what happened there. And those consequences were not taken away by the divine forgiveness. So I think people struggle and feel guilty about I shouldn't be forgiving myself because they have a mistaken view that God's putting my relationship with him right should take away all of the problems psychologically and socially that I have from this. Those have to be lived out and worked out in life. So I don't think that there's really any reason for us to feel guilty. That doesn't mean I didn't feel guilty about it. I did. We struggle with this because all of our lives we have been trained, or as long as we've been Christians, we've been trained to know about God's wonderful, merciful grace and about the transforming power it has. But although it transforms us truly, it doesn't take away all the consequences in the world for the things that I've done.
So it sounds like the rumination part here seems to be very important. You said, because I acknowledge God's forgiven me, but then I continue to go down lines of thinking and different things prompt those thinkings over time. What are some keys to that? That seems to be a huge breakthrough. Romans 12:1-2 talks about transforming the mind. Because even, as I said, I like what you're saying, because I was struggling with, well, if God's forgiven me, what's the big deal? But it sounds like it's the ruminations, there's things of making amends and things like this that we have to work through. Any thoughts on the ruminations that would help us as we begin to think, how do I get out of these patterns of unhealthy thought, I guess?
I think one of the things that is particularly hard for us in dealing with self-condemnation is that we get in these automatic patterns of rumination. So rumination is just thinking negative thoughts, and as we get into these negative thoughts, they can just become a path that we cut through a garden so that it just gets wider and wider the more that we walk down that path. So that rumination, that negative thinking is a hard thing to overcome. I think there are some very conscious ways we can try to overcome that. We could tell ourselves, don't do it. I mean, there's this wonderful little video with Bob Newhart where he is pretending to be a psychologist and he just goes, well, just stop it.
Stop it. Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
But
I've seen that. That's a great tip.
Yeah, but this doesn't really work. We can't just stop it because we want to. So there are conscious things we can do. We can anticipate the the places where we get triggered into those negative patterns and try to figure out how we're going to deal with that. Or do we need to avoid some of those places? Do we need to figure out ahead of time a coping strategy for once that starts, how do I get going? There are things that we can do spiritually. We can pray, and interrupt that cycle by prayer. But prayer to stop doing something, in a way, just tells yourself that you're doing that again. So that is not always effective. God sometimes will just reach in and just help us, supernaturally to stop the rumination patterns. But those are kind of conscious ways. But what gives rumination power often is the fact that it's really empowered by emotion and motivation, and we don't necessarily pay conscious attention to that. So we have these negative feelings, and those feelings trigger off these little patterns, these negative patterns, automatically, without any feeling that this is a volitional act. It's like, no, this is just an automatic thing. I can't stop it from happening. And I think, when we look at our emotional patterns, commanding ourselves logically, however we do it, is probably not going to be the way out. I think prayer, just an arrow prayer, but relying on God to divert us into more positive way of thinking is much more likely. I think the emotional realm is really, I think, a place where the Holy Spirit can work in us and can help us change, and kind of bypass some of the stop it type of really willpower based, I'm going to get out of this. So I think a lot of getting over rumination is about trust. It's about your relationship with the Lord and realizing that, I can trust God. God may have a different reason for letting me go through this rumination right now, but God does have good reasons, and the Lord is going to be in charge of my life.